Okay, so we're in audience analysis and we've begun to talk about demographics. So let's understand what demographics are. So demographics basically are the characteristics of your audience. Okay, so the characteristics meaning what kind of qualities or characteristics, another word for characteristics would be identities or details about the audience. And the way we think of people in terms of their ethnic background or their gender or their biological sex or their sexual orientation or what kind of politics are they interested in or do they support. What's their religion? How do they live their life, their lifestyles? Are they from the country or from the city? I mean, there's all these things that influence how a person behaves and acts, and that's what we're looking at. When we look at those things like race, ethnicity, gender, class, then we understand that those things influence then how the choices people make. Okay, and again, we're going to be making generalizations about this, and that's okay, because that's part of what a speaker's job is, to kind of figure out, draw some conclusions about people based upon these things as we talk about the different categories of demographics. That's okay. It's a way that we then try to massage the message to fit with the people that we're talking about. Okay, so age is an obvious factor. What topic you choose is often age driven, right? If I were to talk about something that happened in the 70s, like I love to talk about 8-track tapes, you probably don't even know what that is, unless you're a person that's like a history major and you know about like historical references to music and stuff like that. An 8-track tape is actually like a big cassette tape, but it's made a little differently. It's a huge thing, and it was used before cassettes, and you could play music in your car with it. That was in the early 70s, before they came out with the cassette tape. So if I were to talk about something like that, I have to think about if I'm going to talk to you about that, it's going to need an explanation. But if I'm talking to people from my age group, they're going to know exactly what I'm talking about because they grew up at the same time. So generational differences in terms of the topics, in terms of how we talk about those topics, in terms of how much detail we need. Remember that common ground piece? What do people know? What can we assume that people know? Presentation aids, we'll talk about that later, but that often has to do with if it's something that if your age group has seen a lot of, but maybe someone in my age group or older hasn't seen a lot of, we may not know what it is. Gender is basically the expression of masculinity or femininity. And you'll notice there's a continuum here, because I want you to think of gender as on a continuum. And I think that at this point in our history, we do think that way. We do think of gender on this continuum of between what's super feminine and super masculine and somewhere in between. That influences how people behave, the choices they make, what they're interested in. It's socially constructed. So in one society, what is considered masculine, or even how bifurcated it is, like how rigid those roles are between masculine and feminine, is also cultural and social and ethnic. So that also influences, again, how a person behaves, what a person's interested in, what they care about. Sexual orientation is about who you're attracted to. It's a range from like heterosexuality to homosexuality. And I think even the range, that's even limited in range, because we have people who categorize themselves as pansexual. We have transgenderism, which can be like not necessarily sexual orientation, it's more a gender category. There's so many ways that people express themselves in terms of their sexual orientation or who they're interested in. You could be asexual. All those things, again, influence your attitudes and beliefs. Okay, and what you want to think about is, how are these things, these particular components of people, then how might they think about certain things, right? What do they care about? It's like, how do we know that people in the Central Valley are aware of agriculture? Why? Because that's our major economy here. You can't not be from the Central Valley and know about the water issue, okay? You can't not be from California and be concerned and care about immigration, especially from Mexico. You can't not, you live here. You have an opinion or you have some feelings about it, right? But if you live in a place that does not border Mexico, you're not going to have the same feeling about immigration when it comes to Mexican immigrants. Okay, making sense now? So it's those kinds of things that you come up with your own understanding or analogy about, or your summation or your conclusion about, based upon those things. Let's talk about race a little. So I have the traditional definition of race, which is race is defined by your skin color. Pigmentation means your skin color, and what your physical features are. Here's the thing about race, kind of like sexual orientation, kind of like gender. It's socially constructed, okay? Which means we have constructed this idea of race, of there's a black race, a white race, a yellow race, a red race. You know, we've given those words, those colors to people, okay? It's a social construction. If you all live on the same continent, you're the same color, there's only one race. You don't even talk about that. Let's think about in Africa, for example, in a country in Africa, where everyone is African, but they come from different tribes. Now we're talking about people that live in a country, but they're defined by tribes. They're not defined by the color of their skin. Let's say we're talking about, we could go to another country. We can go to let's think of like in England, or even in Scotland or Ireland, okay? People are defined in Ireland. Are you orange Irish or green Irish? Are you Catholic Irish or Protestant Irish? Okay, that's not about race, but people are definitely defining themselves. So race is a way of defining and categorizing people. What you have to know, it's a social construction, meaning society has decided to arrange people according to these particular values, in this case, pigmentation of skin and physical features. But in reality, when they say there's only one race, it's a human race, that's really the bottom line of it, because there is only one race, it's the human race. But we have socially constructed race with all the components that is. So if you're of a particular race, you get certain privileges for being of that race. And that happens in this society, it happens in other societies, especially happens in what I want to call a settler society. So this white settlers came to this country, settled here, and so there's white privilege and white supremacy. That is a reality of the way things are. And as a result, people that aren't of that race do not get treated, or have the same rights, or aren't elevated to the same status as the settler nation. And that's not just here. It could be in South Africa. There's other countries. It's not just here. It's other countries that are like that. Okay, it could be. Let's take like nations where a particular religious order got control of another religious order. So now the people that aren't in control of the government and its religious warring, like let's think of like. Why am I not remembering the name of the country? Iraq. Think of when Saddam Hussein was there. So the Sunnis, he was part of the Sunni, which is a religious and kind of tribal belief system. He was part of that. And now the people that weren't part of that didn't get treated or have the same rights. It's the same idea, okay? So again, going back to the social construction, it's about power. Who has power and who doesn't, right? And that's the way you see it getting played out in our society. Okay, I'm going to talk about ethnicity and then we're going to take a little break. Ethnicity is your country of origin, okay? Now your country of origin might be the United States. You were born here, you're American, whatever, you know, whatever that means. America is more about like a value identity than it is actually a physical identity. It's more about a values and national beliefs. Now, if you were born in a country where, let's say you're from Mexico and you were born in, and you're Mexican, right? You were born in Mexico, you're Mexican. But even in Mexico, there's a variety of there's different states in Mexico, different ways of being and practices. There's Mexicans that come from, that are native to like the mountains, what they're like, have more of an Indian heritage. So there's, to talk about ethnicity, it's so complex. But the point of understanding ethnicity is to understand that usually ethnicity is, we bring our cultural practices from our ethnicity. Okay, so it could be American, but it could be like farther back for wherever your people hailed from, whether it's Mexico or the Philippines or England or Australia or China, right? That's what I mean by ethnicity. Where your family, your ancestors came from. And usually included that is, there is a practice of some religion, there is a practice of, you have a certain language. All of that influences how you see the world. And a good speaker knows that, and they'll make assumptions like, not everyone in Mexico is Catholic, right? We know that. However, the Catholic Church has a strong influence on the country of Mexico, like Italy and the Catholic Church, right? So you can make you'll make certain assumptions. They may not be exactly the right assumptions, but you can make certain assumptions. Okay, we're going to stop there. And I am going to talk to you again in the next video about the rest of the presentation.